This is a spooky tale that was found inside of an ancient tomb. It's called the Codex Tenebris, or in English, the Book of Shadows, and it was discovered inside of an underground tomb in Egypt, back in 1922. This was during the excavation of a tomb which was dedicated to the high priest Ptolemy, who lived about 2,000 years ago. But this book wasn't his. Instead, it had been hidden in the walls of the tomb, wrapped up in cloth, concealed from prying eyes, and left behind on purpose, hidden for all these centuries. But why? Why would something so valuable be left in a place where no one could ever see it again? Well, we don't know exactly. The only thing that we can assume is that its contents were forbidden, and that the priest wanted to protect his grimoire from leaving his grasp, even after death. And what kind of secrets could this mysterious book hold? What kind of dark magic did it contain? Well, let's find out. Now, it is important to note that most of the information that we have about the Codex Tenebris comes from the man who discovered it, a man named J.H. Valis Budge, an Egyptologist and librarian to King Tut. He wrote about it in detail in his personal journal, but he never actually showed us the book itself. He died back in 1924, and since then, the book has gone missing and no one knows where it is. So what I'm about to show you is my best attempt at recreating the original pages based off of Budge's descriptions of them. I'll also use some stock photos to help fill in the blanks, but just keep in mind that there are some parts of this story which I have filled in with my own imagination, simply because we do honor know any of the details. So with that said, let's take a look inside the lost grimoire of the Egyptian high priest. Okay, so right off the bat, we can see that this book was clearly not written by one author. Instead, it appears to be a collection of various writings and spells copied down by many different people over many different years. It was sort of like a commonplace book, where someone might jot down a spell here, a ritual there, and each page was numbered so they could easily look it up if they needed to. However, the spells contained within this book were extremely dangerous. They dealt with necromancy, blood magic, and summoning demons. In other words, this was a very dark and forbidden type of magic. The reason why I think that's the case is because many of the pages contained seals, and these weren't just seals to keep the pages together. Instead, they were seals meant to keep the demons trapped within the pages. If you break the seal, the demon could escape and wreak havoc, so these books wouldn't just be dangerous to read, but simply handling them was a serious risk. At the beginning of the book, there was a section which detailed how to construct these seals, and each demon was assigned to a different symbol. For example, the lesser demon, Asmodai, had the symbol of an hourglass, and another demon named Belial had the symbol of a crescent moon. Now, this part of the book was written in a language that we today call, which is the everyday language of ancient Egypt. But there were also parts of the book written in hieroglyphic script, and it was in these parts where the most powerful spells were kept. For example, in one of the hieroglyphic sections, there was a spell that was used to raise an army of the dead. It allowed the caster to raise 36 headless mummies and command them for 3 days before they returned to their graves. But this spell required a lot more than just a simple incantation. It also required the sacrifice of a virgin, and she had to be sacrificed in a very particular way. She would have to be beheaded, but her heart would be removed and placed inside of a jar. Then the jar would be buried, and the spell could begin. Other spells required less human sacrifice, and sometimes even none at all. One such spell was a love spell which allowed the caster to compel someone to fall in love with them. However, this spell required a lock of hair from the intended target, and a very intimate part of the ceremony was rubbing the hair onto the caster's genitals. Other spells in the book could bring good fortune, locate hidden objects, and even control the weather. There was even a spell which could be used to curse someone, but the curse could only be enacted by a circle of 13 people. So while it was effective, it wasn't exactly practical. But some of the spells in the book didn't just affect other people. Some of them affected the caster as well. For example, there was a spell which granted the caster the ability to breathe underwater. But the catch was it drained all of your life force and killed you. Another spell made you invisible, but it turned your skin into burning coals and ash. And there was even a spell that granted you immortality, but it caused you to lose all of your humanity and turned you into a mindless monster. I guess the old saying is true. With great power comes great risk. Now, while we don't know the exact names of all the demons mentioned in the book, we do know the name of one of them. On one of the pages, there was a seal which contained the name of a demon named Amen, and it was written in a very ancient form of Egyptian. Amen was a god of darkness and chaos, and he was later demonized after the Egyptians adopted a monotheistic religion under Ak. Amen was associated with the underworld and was considered to be a bringer of plagues, and according to the book, he was bound to this world by Ra, the sun god. But Amen was just one of many gods and demons referenced in this book. Another demon mentioned was called Abaddon, and he was mentioned next to the symbol of a snake. In Christian lore, Abaddon is one of Satan's most trusted servants. He's the king of the underworld, and is responsible for sending plagues upon the world. So perhaps this is where the Egyptians got their idea of Amen being a bringer of plagues. Another interesting entry that we find in the book is one which talks about the practice of using magic to preserve someone's body after they die. In fact, we have a few entries which talk about this. One of them specifically talks about the process of embalming, but we already knew that this was a common practice among the Egyptians. What's interesting is that there are 2 other entries which talk about preserving the bodies of animals. One entry tells the reader to sacrifice a cat and then embalm it in order to increase your wealth, and another entry instructs the reader to do the same thing but with a dog in order to increase their protection against evil spirits. We already know that cats and dogs were sacred animals in ancient Egypt. The Egyptians believed that cats could protect houses against venomous snakes, and they believed that dogs could guide the souls of the dead through the underworld. So, perhaps they believed that by emulating these animals, they could inherit some of those powers themselves. Finally, we come across a very disturbing entry. This one doesn't have any pictures or seals, so I've taken some creative liberties here. But basically, this entry talks about how to summon an elemental being which lives in the desert. Apparently, this creature is able to possess humans, and the only way to defeat it is by using a silver knife, and this was backed up by other accounts from ancient Egypt. For example, in the British Museum, there's a coffin which has markings of a silver knife stuck inside of it. The coffin belonged to a man named Nunakate, and he had been driven insane by an elemental spirit. His brother performed a ritual to banish the spirit, but he was unable to do so without stabbing himself with a silver knife. The spirit eventually left him alone, but he suffered horrible wounds. Now, whether these stories are true or not, and whether they were written by actual eyewitnesses or just copyists who were repeating what they heard, we may never know. But one thing's for certain. This book contained knowledge that was too dangerous for the average person. If the priests of ancient Egypt were willing to hide something this powerful away in a secret tomb, then you can bet that they didn't want it to get into the wrong hands. And judging by the fact that it survived for so long and only recently got lost, I'd say their efforts were successful. But now it's time to hear from you. What did you think about this story? Were you scared by any of the spells? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.